guys, Tiffany here with a cosplay tutorial on how I made the sheath for my Alice cosplay from the anime Sword Art Online Alicization. And if you'd like to make your own sheath, I have a 2D blueprint as well as 3D CAD/STL file for the sheath available on my website www.tiffanygordoncosplay.com or see the links below. Now to start off for the sheath build, I worked in a 3D modeling program called Rhino 6. And this is a bit of an expensive program, so I recommend if you're starting off to try things out in Blender first. And to make the sheath, I first started off by having the finalized sword CAD work done. This way I could make all of my dimensions around the sword. Once I got the placement where I want it to be in the correct dimensions, I then started to extrude some of my lines to get the correct height that I wanted, making each piece into solid blocks. And when that was done, I focused on the detail parts at the top first, splitting all of the pieces in half because they were only on the top half of the sheath, and then subtracting the pieces with the Boolean difference tool, so that way it would take away the shape on the inside of the object and would leave just the flower pieces showing. Now that the detail work is done, time to work on the main part of the sheath. And for the sheath, we had a base block that was solid but very sharp on all the edges. So to get rid of all the sharp edges, you can do a few tools, but I decided to draw all of my lines and offset them a little bit and draw a slight curvature so that way I would have a really nice rounded shape around the whole sheath part. This is very important because the sheath is going to be wrapped later on in leather, and you don't want any sharp edges to actually rip the leather. And when I got one side done, I then mirrored it to the other side so that way it would look the same. And now that that's done, it's time to figure out how to hollow it on the inside. And for this, I first made it so the sword would appear on my CAD work again, so that way I knew where it sat inside of the sheath. And then the sheath, I duplicated it one more time and made it slightly smaller in all directions. That way I'd have it as the piece that we're going to use to remove from the inside of our outer block. And then when I was happy with the placement, I then used the Boolean difference tool again to remove the inside. And the last step to make the sheath is to use the Boolean union tool. This is going to make all the pieces combine into one solid piece. The next step is to segment your piece into sections for the height of your 3D printer to print. And I do this by making little rectangular boxes that I can then use the lines as guidelines to cut the sheath and put it into sections, and then I will close all of the ends so that way each individual piece would be solid and easy to print. And here's what the 4 pieces looked like once they were done and in the correct orientation for printing on my printer bed. Now to print each piece, and for this I will be using my Prusa i3 Mark 2.5 3D printer and printed each of these pieces in PLA filament. And when they were all done and printed, it was time to remove all of the structural support pieces, and for this I use a combination of pliers and wire cutters and some files. For further cleanup and removal of the stair-step method on all of my 3D printed prints, I went to my workbench and used a couple different burnishing wheels to kind of knock down some of the edges and remove any extra little bits. But I really only focused on the top piece because all of the other pieces are going to be wrapped in leather. And for even more further reduce of the stair-step pieces, I go back with the flexible DAP spackling and I apply it to all of the surfaces using a glove and a little bit of water, and this is going to fill all of those pieces. The spackling does take in total 24 hours to dry, so after that then you can go back and sand it, and I use a 220 grit sandpaper. And for even more stair step removal, I go outside to my spray booth and I spray some heavy coats of sandable spray paint. This is also going to be another thing that is going to add material to the top surface of your prints and fill in all of those little stair step pieces. And one last time, a light sanding on the entire piece, and this should pretty much make all of your parts smooth. Now, before attaching all of the pieces together, I wanted to add felt to the inside of the sheath. This is so that way when your sword blade goes inside the sheath, it will not scratch and ruin your pretty paint job. So I took measurements of each of the inside pieces of the sheath parts and then cut them out on the felt. And this type of felt has an adhesive on the back, but I don't typically trust anything that has adhesive, so I ended up applying a tiny bit of contact cement glue to just the edges of each piece of the sheath, and when that was dry, removed the little covering on the felt and placed each of the felt pieces on the inside and used a ruler to help flatten it out on the inside so it would make sure it would stick. And when they were attached, I then used scissors to remove the extra bits on either side. I continued to do this for all 4 sides of the inside of each of the sheath pieces. Now to attach each of the pieces together, and for this I use epoxy. Applying epoxy to both sides of the ends and then attaching them together and using weighted bags to help hold them together while they set. Side note, these are merely supposed to be more for tacking the pieces together, and the leather, when it's going to be wrapped around, is really going to be what holds it. Now for the leather part, and for this I used Ravello Leather's whole hides in a tan color, and cut the hide in a rectangle shape that will fit fully around the sheath. And for attaching the leather onto the sheath, I'm going to be using Sobo glue. Starting off with the back side being the seam in the very center, applying the glue to the entire sheath part on the back, and then attaching the leather on top and using a leather burnishing tool to get out any of the bumps or any air pockets so it will fully attach to the 3D CAD sheath part. And then slowly worked around the sheath in one direction doing the same method. For the front part, it was a little bit more tricky just because there was the detail part at the top, so I still applied all of the Sobo glue, and then starting from the bottom, working my way towards the top, smoothed it with the burnishing tool, and then used scissors and an X-Acto blade to kind of cut out where the shape was going to be wanting to protrude through the leather. And continued to put the leather on the rest of the sheath all the way until the whole thing was covered. And on the very back, used an X-Acto knife to trim the extra bit of leather that overlapped. Now, our sheath is not a rectangle at the bottom, so I did have to use an X-Acto knife and kind of cut it and puzzle piece the bottom so it came to a triangle. And here's what it looked like once the leather was all attached. And now you're done and ready to paint. For painting, we're going to be using Createx Colors' Wicked Color airbrush paint line, as well as my Iwata Eclipse airbrush paint gun. Starting off with a base coat of black onto the entire sheath. This includes on the leather as well. I next went in with a mix of the gold chrome and pyro orange, doing a mix and painting it on top of all of the detail pieces at the top of the sheath. And when that was dry, I masked it off with some masking tape and then did a little bit more black airbrush paint to all of the flyaway parts of the paint. The next color was for the main part of the sheath, and this was a mix of the cream and Hansa yellow. And this part took a few coats, and then I went over with a light mist of white on top to kind of give it a little bit more of a glow look. Now time for details, and I first started off by removing all of the masking tape and did a mix of white and limelight green, applying this to the inside part around all of the flower star pieces by hand with a paintbrush. And then went around all of the edges with black. This way it'll make it kind of have that anime pop-like look. The final step of the sheath was to seal it, and for this I used Createx Colors UVLS Clear Satin, applying a light coat to the entire sheath by paintbrush. And once it was fully dry, the sheath was done! Thank you guys so much for watching this cosplay tutorial on how I made the sheath for my Alice cosplay from the anime Sword Art Online Alicization. And if you like this video, like it, comment on what you liked about it, and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you for our next cosplay tutorial. Much love, guys!